Ever feel like, those choices you make, maybe they aren't totally up to you? Kind of a freaky thought, right? So today we're going deep, really deep into this whole free will thing. We're going to mess with our minds a bit and talk about, get this, the idea that we might be living in a simulated reality. And just to ground us a little, we'll see what that ancient wisdom of Stoicism has to say about it all.
It's a lot to unpack, that's for sure.
You got that right. So to kick things off, let's talk about this neuroscientist, Robert Sapolsky. He's got some seriously thought-provoking, actually maybe even a little unsettling, ideas about free will.
Yeah, he's not afraid to challenge the status quo, that's for sure.
Not at all. He's basically saying what we think of as free will, it might be more like an illusion.
An illusion, huh?
Yeah, like a magic trick our brains are playing on us. And he backs it up by talking about all these layers of influence that shape who we are, like our genes, how we were raised, even the whole culture we're swimming in.
It's like those Russian nesting dolls, You open one and there's another one inside and another and another. Each layer kind of reveals something new about what's going on beneath the surface.
Exactly. And you know what's really interesting? This idea of layers, it kind of connects to the whole simulated reality thing.
Oh, how so? I'm intrigued.
Well, think about it. What if those layers Sapolsky talks about, what if they're like lines of code, And those lines of code, they're shaping our behaviors, our choices, everything in this big, giant simulated world.
Oh, okay, now you're blowing my mind a little bit.
Right. It makes you wonder, what does free will even mean in that kind of reality?
Yeah, if our reality is just a super sophisticated program, are we really making our own decisions, or are we just following the script that's already been written?
It's like that classic scene in The Matrix. Blue pill, you stay in the comfy illusion, red pill, and bam, you see how deep the rabbit hole really goes. But here's the kicker. Even if we choose the red pill, do we actually have a choice in a simulated world?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And Sapolsky really digs into this by pointing to all these experiments, those ones that suggest our brains might actually be making decisions before we're even consciously aware of them.
So it's like our brains are making the call, and then they're like, hey, conscious mind, here's what we just decided. Okay.
It's a bit unsettling when you really think about it. That feeling of making a choice, maybe it's just our brains playing catch-up with what's already been set in motion.
It's almost like our brains are narrating this whole story and we're just along for the ride. So how does this all connect back to this whole simulation idea?
Well, you gotta think, a simulation is basically a system, right? It's got all these predetermined rules and processes that make it work.
Right, like the laws of physics in a video game.
Exactly. And if our brains are operating under similar constraints, think about it. Genes, environment, all those layers Sapolsky talks about, it starts to blur the lines between what we think of as free will and what might actually be, predetermined.
So are we saying our lives are just pre-programmed, like we're just acting out some cosmic script?
It's a heavy thought, that's for sure.
Definitely makes you think, right? Okay, so before we completely spiral down this rabbit hole of existential dread.
Yeah, I think we need a little grounding here.
For sure. There's got to be a way to navigate this without freaking out completely.
There is, and you're not going to believe this, but there's this ancient philosophy, Stoicism, and it's surprisingly relevant to all of this.
Yay, are you serious? Ancient philosophy is going to help us wrap our heads around simulated realities and our brains potentially making decisions for us.
I know, it sounds crazy, right? But trust me on this. At its core, Stoicism basically says, hey, stop stressing about the things you can't control and focus on what you can. And when you're dealing with these mind-bending concepts of free will and simulated realities, well, what better approach is there?
It's like, even if we are just characters in some giant video game, Stoicism is saying we can still choose how we play the game.
Exactly. And that's a really empowering thought, don't you think? But before we dive into all the practical wisdom that Stoicism has to offer, let's break down a few of its key principles. All right, so let's dive into this Stoic wisdom, shall we? One of the core concepts they talk about is this thing called the dichotomy of control.
Dichotomy of control. Sounds kinda intense.
It's actually pretty simple when you break it down. It's basically this. There are things you can control, and there are things you can't. Stoicism says, focus your energy on the things you can control.
Okay, I can see how that's helpful. Instead of getting all worked up about whether or not we're living in a simulation, which is way beyond our control, we should focus on, our own thoughts and actions.
Bingo. You got it. And this ties into another key principle of Stoicism. Virtue as the only true good.
So being a good person, like making ethical choices, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Being virtuous. Cultivating wisdom, justice, courage, these inner qualities, they're what truly matter no matter what reality we find ourselves in.
So it's like even if our actions are already predetermined or if some supercomputer is running our lives, Stoicism is saying, hey, focus on being a good person anyway.
You got it. In a world where so much can feel uncertain, Stoicism reminds us that we always have control over our character, our moral compass. That's what gives our lives meaning, regardless of all the external stuff.
This is making me think about how much our modern world seems to crave a sense of control, you know? Like we want to control our news feeds, our careers, everything. But maybe Stoicism is saying, hey, some things are just beyond our control, and that's okay.
It's a very liberating perspective, actually. And you know what? This leads us to another fascinating Stoic concept. Are you ready for this one? It's called amor fati.
Amor fati. Okay, now you're just messing with me, right? What does that even mean?
I know, it sounds kind of fancy, but it basically means loving your fate.
Loving your fate. But what if your fate is predetermined? What if you don't have a choice in the matter? How can you love that?
Great question. See, amor fati, it's not about passively accepting everything that happens, like you have no say in the matter. It's more about embracing what life throws your way, finding meaning and growth in all circumstances, even the tough ones.
So it's about changing your perspective, right? Not trying to control everything, but controlling how you react to what happens.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that even if we don't have control over every single event in our lives, we always have control over how we respond. And that's where our freedom lies, our ability to find meaning and purpose, even within the framework we're given.
I'm starting to see how powerful this whole Stoic approach can be. But how do we actually put these ideas into practice? It's one thing to talk about loving your fate and focusing on what you can control, but how do we actually live that out every day? Especially when we're hit with those moments where we question, like, the very fabric of reality. So we've been diving deep into this whole love your fate thing, but how do we actually make that like a real part of our lives? It's almost like if life is a simulation, how do we hack the code to make it less glitchy? You know what I mean?
That's a really interesting way to put it. And, Stoicism actually emphasizes this idea of mindfulness, like really paying attention to our thoughts, our emotions, how we react to things. It's almost like we're trying to step outside of our programming for a second, just to observe those automatic responses and be like, okay, do I want to go with this, or is there a different path I want to choose?
Okay, I think I'm getting that. So it's not about just accepting everything blindly. It's more about becoming aware of those patterns, those knee-jerk reactions, and then making a conscious decision about whether to roll with it or try to break free.
You got it. It's about taking control where you can, even if it's just in those little moments between stimulus and response. And this connects to another big idea in Stoicism, and that's aligning with nature.
Wait, hold up. Are you suggesting we all go live in the woods and ditch our phones? Because honestly, after all this talk about simulations, a digital detox is sounding kind of tempting right now.
I hear you. It's a lot to process. But when Stoics talk about aligning with nature, they're not just talking about trees and mountains. Even in a simulated world, there would still be a set of rules, right? A code that governs how everything operates.
Okay, yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Stoicism says, study those rules, understand them, whether it's the laws of physics in our perceived reality or those ethical principles that guide us towards a more meaningful, fulfilling life.
So even if our reality is a simulation, figuring out those rules, working with them instead of against them, that might be the key to actually enjoying the ride. It's like finding the cheat codes to a good life, even if someone else wrote the game.
Now you're getting it. But here's the thing, and it's important to acknowledge this, all of this is still theoretical. We don't have concrete proof that free will is an illusion or that we're chilling in some giant simulation. Those are questions we might never have definitive answers to.
So where does that leave us? If we can't definitively answer these huge questions about free will and simulated realities, what are our listeners supposed to take away from all of this?
It matters because these questions, they make us think critically. They make us look inward and examine our own beliefs about the world and how we fit into it. They push us beyond our comfort zones. And beyond that, Stoicism, it gives us tools, really practical tools for navigating uncertainty and finding meaning, no matter what reality throws our way.
It's like Stoicism is saying, hey, whether or not you have free will or live in a simulation, here's how to live a good life. Focus on what you can control. Try to be a good person. Make choices that align with your values and see what happens.
Exactly. It's about finding agency, purpose, meaning even joy in a world where things might not be as they seem.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. Free will, simulated realities, ancient philosophy, it's been quite the ride. But you know what? It's left me wondering, if we can find a sense of peace in a world where our control might be limited, if we can still find purpose and even find a reason to smile, does it really matter if our choices are free in the way we always thought they were? That's something I'm going to be chewing on for a while. And for our listeners, we hope this deep dive has sparked some curiosity, maybe even a little bit of that philosophical fire. Keep asking those big questions, keep exploring different ideas, and keep diving deep. Until next time.